Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today, once again, I'm joined by Colin Watt. Welcome back, Colin.
Thanks very much, Paul.
How's your week been?
Kind of complain, really, can you?
Well, you could.
Well, you could, but
there's plenty to complain about, mate.
I just don't know if anybody cares or listens.
Well, there's plenty of people listening, because on that point, what I would like to say is thank you, everybody, for tuning in. In October, our audience across all platforms was over 450,000.
That's incredible, isn't it?
That's unreal. It's unreal.
I mean, 450,000 over 30 days, you're talking 15,000 at least a day.
It's an incredible upturn. And
sometimes you had a day off as well.
Did I?
I thought, well, I hope so.
On a weekend, on a day that Celtic are not playing, I do tend not to put out a broadcast, but I do put out a podcast instead. But on an international weekend, I do tend to come in and at least do one broadcast. So, you know, it's very much appreciated, everybody coming in and getting involved and commenting and sharing and subscribing on YouTube. That's what it's all about, Colin. So hopefully the next target's 500,000 and we can push it on. It's not clickbait. It doesn't make a blind bit of difference because we don't work on ad revenue, so it makes no difference to any of that before any accusations are thrown our way regarding clickbait and all that kind of stuff, sensationalism. That's not how it works on the broadcast and the podcast. So, Colin, plenty to discuss. We've got a massive game coming up tomorrow. There's been a few weeks of unrest and amongst Celtic supporters, I guess. How are you feeling going into Thursday night's game?
Do you know what? I'm actually pretty optimistic. I've just found out today that Sparta will be without 7 key players for the game on Thursday night, including the first choice goalkeeper and their 18-year-old wonder kid, who's been their kind of top star this season. Don't ask me to try and pronounce their names because it just won't happen. But it looks as if we might finally catch a wee break here with everything that's going on. We've been without a lot of our key players because of COVID and injuries, and now it looks as if other teams are going to be suffering from it. I fancy our chances on Thursday night. I'm actually pretty confident.
Good.
Which is I think it may be to do with the fact that our performances over the last few games have certainly started to improve.
Let's talk about it. For you, when did they start to improve? Because, I mean, we had Lawrence in yesterday, and he believes that after the Rangers defeat, that there were signs of improvement against AC Milan. I mean, I look at the Aberdeen game as, you know, being unable to hold on to a 3-2 lead. Mm-hmm. We've then gone to Lille. I pinpoint the Lille performance, or an hour of the game against Lille, has been a bit of a turning point for the performances. I
understand where Lawrence is coming from with the AC Milan game. Certainly in the second half we played a lot better. Mm-hmm. And I said to the people I was watching it with at the time that if Celtic got one in that game, I fancied them to get a second, and it looked as if they were kind of on course to do that before AC Milan managed to get their third goal. The Aberdeen performance, for me, it was a game management issue there. We should have really tried to see that game out, and the fact that we couldn't just kind of summed up the period that Celtic had been going through over that time. Lennon then came out, gave a press conference, which he really, for me, I think he had to give. I think he had to come out there and defend himself and defend his players and make sure that you could see that the fight was still there in him, and that certainly came through last week against Lille. Fantastic first half performance. Again, the second half, the defence was a bit shaky. That's where they got the goals back. And I did say to you last week, I think it was, we need a clean sheet to get it going. Is the clean sheet from the weekend what we needed? Have we now got a back four that we can turn to? I've actually made one change to the back four for Thursday when we go to the predicted team.
Okay.
But I think Beaton alongside Duffy at the minute is not a bad proposition.
Well, we know that you're a big fan of Beaton, Colin. He made it into your team of the decade at centre-half.
Yes.
And obviously you, a bit of a Nostradamus when it comes to predictions, etc. But I've got to agree with you. I think he adds a cool edge to the defence, sometimes too cool. Sometimes it becomes a bit lax. But against Lille, for me, the turning point of that game was Ayer going off.
Yes.
And after that, that's where obviously they started to exploit a bit of the dysfunctional nature of the defence, but also a bit of fatigue. And that's where, again, going back to what you said about game management, and I'm not being overly critical here of Neil Lennon, but I think we left the changes of Christie and Cham and Brown too late in that game, maybe by 15, 20 minutes. So you look at Christie's reaction to the goal, he's turned round, he's let the guy run. He looks heavy-legged at that point. So, albeit, what a result. And I think, and I've said this a couple of times, that result against Lille will actually get better with age, Colin. When we see what they're going to achieve potentially this season, we'll look back on an away 2-2 against Lille as being a fantastic result. And I think that, for me, was a turning point. I'm not going to belabour the fact that we threw away or lost a 2-goal lead. I was far more impressed with the Lille performance than the performance against Aberdeen. I think when you're watching the game, you could visibly see the lines, you could see the shape, that everybody was being very disciplined in terms of their own roles within the greater mechanism of the team. That carried on against Aberdeen. I felt that Aberdeen was fairly comfortable. Would you agree with that? I thought it was comfortable. Obviously, we worked for it, but at no point did I feel under the cosh or under any threat from that Aberdeen side. Yeah,
but this is the thing with Celtic. Last season, if you'd went 2-0 up almost in any game, you were sort of saying, right, we're going to see this game out now. You weren't really expecting the other team to come back into it too much. And that's kind of the way it felt in the semi-final the other day. Once it kind of got to 2-0, it was a case of, well, are we going to go on and get a third? Are we going to just kind of settle for it? And to be fair, the game management in the second half was very good. I think there was a break on towards the end of the second half where Griffiths basically just killed the ball, got the ball, kind of ran it towards the corner flag, where he could have maybe went on to try and get a shot in and goal, but he just killed the ball. He knew what the time was. We are at a situation where we're playing 3 games a week. A lot of these guys are going to be playing the full 90 minutes because you can only make 5 subs. So the more time you've got the ball and not chasing it, it's better. So Griffiths was very smart in what he done, run it into the corner. Game management starting to improve. The team's starting to gel. Is it because we've changed the formation? We're now at the 4-2-3-1. Does it offer us more defensive coverage? Does it let the attacking players be more creative?
Does it suit Shane Duffy more?
I would say so.
Right.
I think where Duffy's weaknesses have been exploited is when you've got 2 guys next to him in the likes of Ayer, who loves to make that surging run forward.
The galloping run.
Yeah. You've got Julian, who likes to try and spread the ball about. But both Duffy and Julian aren't blessed with pace. So when you've got strikers that can get in behind, when you've got the quicker defender of the 3, which I would say is Christopher Ayer, if he's made the run forward, he's going to play these passes which are risky passes at times, but it's the risky passes that can end up leading you into the best positions. If he gets caught out and you're looking at those 2 at the back, that's where we've really struggled this season. Even the boy Welsh, when he's came in, he's kind of been the same. So having Beaton, he knows that Beaton's not going to make a surging run forward. He knows that he's the player that he can pass the ball to. Even at the weekend, Duffy made like a 30-40 yard pass across the field.
It was a great pass.
So
does that come in with the confidence as well?
I'd say so, yeah.
Couple of decent performances under his belt, settling down. It's been difficult. I mean, let's look at the actual situation with Duffy there, Colin, having not played for a long time. And we got some info from a friend of the podcast, Spencer Vignes, who is a Brighton and Hove Albion fan and also an author. And he gave us the rundown on what we were going to get with Duffy. Because I kept saying to Kevin Graham, I'm sick of this term, a no-nonsense defender, because it just paints a picture of me that, just some guy that sticks a toe out and sticks his head on everything. And you're looking at the way Celtic play and you're thinking, well, that surely that's the basic defensive mechanism of any centre-half. And what you're looking for is a wee bit extra. So in Julian, I think what you get is you get that distribution that puts me in mind of the likes of Stubbs and dare I say Gary Caldwell. And then you've got the type of player that Ayer is, that when you look at him, you can see that he spent a lot of his career, his earlier career, further up the park. Yep. Although I don't subscribe to the fact that we should ever try and avert him back into a midfielder. I think Ayer's found his position. He's a ball-playing centre-half. And then I thought, well, Duffy comes in and he is your old-school defender, centre-half. And obviously he hadn't played for several months regularly before he comes up to Scotland. And we know that he's playing 2 and 3 games a week at a high level in Europe, at a high level internationally. He's not had the settled defence. He's not even had the settled goalie behind him, Colin. So there comes a point where the captain of the Republic of Ireland's true colours will start to come out, and I think and hope that that's started over the last couple of games.
It's an interesting point you make about the goalkeeper as well. I've got to say it's a big kudos to Scott Bain over the last few weeks. I think he's certainly came in and...
Are you a fan?
I'm a fan of Scott Bain. I do agree that he won't be the permanent number one, but at the moment I think he's in the right place for Celtic. He's someone that can come in, can push for that jersey, can push Barkas on. Now, when we spoke about the Barkas signing, we're saying that it was Stevie Woods that actually went out and scouted him. So Stevie Woods has been following him, and if you look at Stevie Woods' track record at Celtic, then he knows a good goalkeeper when he sees one. So
he does. I
don't think we can write Barkas off. I think Barkas needs some time to settle into Scottish football, to learn the way that Celtic play, and to grow his own confidence. And I think the time that he'll spend with Woods, and the fact that he's lost his jersey will push him on, and we'll see the best of him later on in the season. But with Bain, you know, he's reliable. He's probably the best number 2 in Scotland. But some Rangers fans will argue it's their number 2, whoever it be, McLaughlin or McGregor. But I think Bain is a very reliable goalkeeper.
I was happy with Scott Bain going into the new season, Colin. I mean, we keep saying that you need, or you would like to have 3 players in every position. Yeah. And I was quite happy with Scott Bain being the backup. There's been obviously discussions over the last couple of weeks about Celtic goalkeepers because of the nature of the criticism Barkas was getting, first and foremost. He's not been dropped. He dropped out due to injury, and I think that helps. I think that helps any player, because any professional knows that if you're out injured and the person performs, you need to win the jersey back. So I think it's a perfect situation for Neil Lennon. But I've also seen quite a lot of discussion around 2 other goalkeepers who had at our disposal last season, Fraser Forster and Craig Gordon. People suggest, we should still go for Forster in January. And then we're looking at maybe Craig Gordon's performance against Hibs and that cracking save that he makes with the left hand. And we're saying, could he have done a job? But sometimes the absence thing, of many players down the years, they become a greater player. I mean, there was a reason why Craig Gordon was potentially 2nd/3rd choice at Celtic last season. So I don't particularly subscribe to that. I think he is deserving of his call up to the Scotland squad, Craig Gordon. But, I'm not losing any sleep over the fact that he's no longer at Celtic, to be fair. I think we've got Scott Bain, you know what you've got with Bain. We're still learning about Barkas to a degree. But I'm certainly not writing Barkas off. He's come in, £4.5 million, quite a reputation, and he's coming for a lot of flack. But I think as things settle down, and I hope they are settling down in terms of the performances, Colin, that I would expect that slowly but surely Barkas would be reintroduced into the starting lineup as our number 1. Would you be quite happy going into January and not bringing in a 3rd goalie?
Probably. I think in January it will be the time to look for reinforcements in other positions that we might need. Who would have thought that would be this far into the season and would be without James Forrest, or Mikey Johnson wouldn't be back in the frame,
and Julien, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So I think January will be used to reinforce other positions. By all accounts, the young goalkeepers that are coming through at Celtic are pretty highly rated in Connor Hazard and Ross Doohan. I don't really know how Doohan's getting on at Ross County. I've not been able to keep track on that, but they have 3 goalkeepers all called Ross, so who don't know which one of them's playing. I think we could be able to look for other positions and strengthen other positions in January rather than the goalkeeper. Craig Gordon, I'm absolutely delighted for him, right?
You were shouting for him to be a coach earlier on in the season when you actually recommended Barkas, which was quite an early shout, I've got to say.
It was I seen him as a player coach, and I'm pretty sure that's the role he's got at Hearts. And you can see that he's got the experience. and he's shown his experience. He showed it at the weekend in the game. Do you know what? Craig Gordon wasn't getting regular game time at Celtic, and I don't think he would still get regular game time at Celtic.
No, I agree with that.
So
I agree with that.
There's no point in having someone there that was picking up such high wages that would just sit about as a third choice goalkeeper, especially when there's no reserve football or anything like that this season.
I know, and the thing is with that, interestingly enough, I was actually speaking yesterday to a real gentleman in the game, one of these guys who's in the background, called Ian Grassick, who was a Heart of Midlothian scout for 35 years, and he discovered Craig Gordon and brought him into what was then called Hearts Boys Club as a young kid, and he was telling me all about his attributes, and he's so chuffed for him, obviously, because he feels that he's maybe played a part in that player's development and in many other players' developments. We were talking about Darren Jackson, for example, and how Ian was trying to get Hearts to sign him as a kid, and they actually refused to sign him. He went to Meadowbank, and it took a long time for him to eventually get to Hearts. But when you're talking about Craig Gordon, I take your point there. When Barkas is maybe not playing so well, would Gordon have got a game before Bain? Potentially. I think that comes down to Lenny. But I think Lenny's been quite impressed with Bain's attitude. He actually spoke about an improvement in Scott Bain's attitude. And I think, that clean sheet will do his confidence wonders against Aberdeen. And I will be gradually asking you for your team on Thursday night. Who gets the jersey?
Oh, Scott Bain.
Scott Bain for you.
Yeah, until a goalkeeper makes a mistake, I don't see any reason to drop someone.
I agree with that. Totally agree with it. And while we're on this subject, let's talk about your predicted 11. What is the story? What's the update with Ayer's injury?
Doesn't look as if Ayer will be fit for Thursday night. I think you'll probably see him once we come back from the international break. I don't think he'll make the Motherwell game on Sunday either. So happy to stick with the back two then of Beaton and Duffy. This is where my change comes in. So I've brought in El Hamid at right back, instead of Frimpong. There was a lot of discussion, I think it was yesterday, where we spoke about Frimpong getting a rest. I think Lawrence said he's young enough, he doesn't need a rest. But with what's been going on in the media over the last couple of days, and also I don't think his performances have been great over the last couple of games either. He's certainly not to the high standards that he set himself when he first broke into the team. I just think El Hamid offers that extra defensive coverage, and it's good to see him back in amongst the squad. So I'm putting El Hamid at right back.
And we will come back to speak about the issues you mentioned in relation to Jeremy Frimpong. We'll come back to that during the show as well, Colin. But so El Hamid at right, Laxalt at left?
Yes, Laxalt at left. I mean, Laxalt's the man of the moment, isn't he? I mean, he's been absolutely fantastic. He seems to thrive on these high pressure games. Even the game against Rangers, I think he was one of our standout players, although we had very few of them. He was very good.
Not a bad game.
No, definitely not. No. And the fact that he's got his first win under his belt as well. I've followed him on Instagram, and he just seems like a genuine nice guy, a family man, and when he goes on the park, he just gives his all for the club, and that's all you can ask at the end of the day.
I think he's got something that when you're looking at a potential, and I know that it's not a loan to buy, Colin, but you're looking at a potential permanent deal. I'm going to be talking about some of the speculation surrounding at least Ryan Christie, but if you're looking at a player who's come in and he looks the real deal, and people maybe argue with this, but I thought that about Eduard. If you're going to bring in a player that looks the real deal and you push the boat out in terms of the transfer fee that you're prepared to pay, what kind of transfer fee are we looking at? 9-10 million quid for a player like Black Salt? Here's the thing,
so I don't know how true this is, but I was reading something yesterday.
You don't let the truth get in the way of a good story normally, Colin, so fire away.
That was suggesting that we'd be able to pick up Black Salt at the end of this current loan deal for £4.5 million. And if that is the case,
a no-brainer.
That is a no-brainer.
Absolutely. That's a no-brainer.
Because he's worth a lot more than that. I don't know how many years is left still on his contract at Milan, but if that is the fee, £4.5 million, then definitely got to
bite their hand off. You absolutely do. So there, you've given us the defence. Work your way through. Is it the same generally as the Aberdeen lineup then after that one change?
I believe so, yeah. So I'm going with the 4-2-3-1. We certainly look a lot more calmer having adopted that formation. It's a shame because there is a good partnership to be had up front with Edouard and Ayeti, I think, eventually. But with the players that we've got at our disposal, especially defensively, I think it's best at the moment to stick with the 4-2-3-1. So Brown and McGregor holding, Christie wide right, Rogic through the middle, Elyounoussi wide left, and French Eddie up front.
So you're going for Edouard up top. I think I've said already that as much as possible I would be sticking with the team that started against Aberdeen at the weekend. The only change I would make is if Ayer was back fit, I would put him right back in it with Duffy. No disrespect to Beaton, because I do rate him highly, but I definitely don't think he's a first pick for me. Ayer would be right back in the side. In terms of Frimpong, and we'll lead on to the Frimpong story as well, I'd keep him in. I think there's areas of his game that he needs to improve on, but you only get that by playing games. And I watched against Lille, a real discipline Frimpong's defensive play, and in particular, he bombs down the right, and he finds himself on the byline, and if it doesn't work out, he's got a long way to get back. I think against Lille, he was far more disciplined, and El Hamid, I can understand the change, but I don't know if it would be good at this time. That's the balance that obviously Neil Lennon needs to decide on. So the situation with Jeremy Frimpong is, it came out fairly recently to talk about the fact that his young ex-teammate at Man City had committed suicide, Colin. So obviously, these things, they are part of a situation, I think, that is often ignored in football. When young players are released from their contracts, and there's a whole tranche of them every single year, what happens to them? It's often ignored by the big clubs, and you're looking at the transfer deadline and millions are getting thrown about all over the place. But meanwhile, you've got all these young kids and going into their early 20s, Colin, because a lot of the Celtic players that have been freed from their contracts in the pre-season there were maybe 21. They'd spent maybe 13 years at the club, and their dreams are shattered. And how does it affect them on a mental level? And obviously the boy in question couldn't handle that. He's committed suicide. It's dreadful, tragic. So Jeremy Frimpong talks about that, and then a matter of days later, there's what can only be described as a horrific headline from the Sun newspaper, and the headline for me was that Jeremy Frimpong was, and I quote, because it's not terminology I would use, branded gay by US Flame. Now, your sexuality isn't something that you're branded with. You're gay, you're heterosexual, it's your sexuality. You don't get branded with it. It's not as though it's something to be ashamed of, Colin. It was disgraceful, the headline that was used. And then obviously you get everybody piling in on social media of a certain persuasion, talking about, Frimpong's breached this and breached that. Frimpong's not breached anything. But I just think the headline itself and those responsible for it is something that needs to be challenged. It certainly needs to, and I know that they swiftly removed it and replaced it. But we're still at that stage where somebody has to ask you to remove a headline like that. Is it not obvious that is completely inappropriate?
I mean, it's absolutely appalling. There's no other words for it. I'm biting my tongue here because I read it last night, and the words that I'd want to say aren't fit for this broadcast. That newspaper is scum. The Scottish Sun, the Sun in general, is a terrible, terrible newspaper. They've been proven time and time and time again to produce ridiculous articles that have a go at society and people in society that do not deserve it. They still, to this day, are still insistent on having within their archive that headline about the Hillsborough tragedy and blaming the fans for that. It is a terrible, terrible newspaper. I can't understand anybody that wants to work for that newspaper, and I don't know why it's still in production. You spoke earlier about clickbait. That's exactly what that was yesterday, was clickbait, and they think that it's funny that you can just brand someone gay. We just spoke about Jeremy Frimpong talking about his ex-teammate committing suicide. Thousands of people across the UK right now have that mindset because they're scared to come out about their sexuality. Because they're scared of what society will think about them. and yet they think it's just something that they can throw out there so that people will click on it and it becomes a sensational headline. It's absolutely shocking.
It is shocking. I mean, when you look at the old school kiss and tell sensationalism of the tabloid press, it was something that, day to day you would read about it, and they're always looking for the more high profile, the better, Colin. And in a week where we've seen other scandals emerging from the world of football in terms of domestic violence, etc., which obviously is something that we won't comment on specifically. It's something that, there's a situation where you don't feed the issues that these people who are suffering from mental health issues already are already suffering. And that's been compounded by the scenario that we're currently in with lockdowns and the fear of the unknown. And I think I made a comment a while back. There's been some studies based on the language used time and time again in the media. And, for years and years, it's not been challenged. Even when you're talking about mental health, Colin, even all the terms that are used is something crazy. If something's crazy and all this kind of terminology that's used without people thinking, crackpot, all these different words that are used in headlines continuously to this day in the media. But when the study was done and they were actually speaking to people with mental health issues and they were asked, if you saw that on a newsstand, would that affect you? The use of those terms where you may be on the verge of having a breakdown. And they said it did. So I think there's a responsibility across the board for people to watch the language that's being used. And not just during the lockdown, but as we move out of the period of lockdown and the pandemic and the restrictions that entails. And hopefully that's something that will happen sooner rather than later, because obviously there are people suffering out there. But yes, to dive on Jeremy Frimpong, whose mental health might have even been suffering due to the fact that they've lost someone close to them, and to use that as a headline and to try and twist the knife in Jeremy Frimpong is wrong. It's wrong. But again, I don't know if that will affect Jeremy Frimpong in terms of playing this week. That's something that Neil Lennon and Frimpong himself will need to decide.
Yeah, definitely, and I hope it doesn't, because the lad doesn't deserve it. He doesn't deserve it at all. I mean, it really angers me, that newspaper. We found out today it wasn't even a sport journalist that published that story, and the amount of stories that they've put out there before, but have just had completely misleading headlines that are. They never apologise for them. When you see an apology, it might be a front page headline and it's there to sell papers, and then see when they get it wrong, it's a tiny wee 3-line apology in a paper 3 days later. They mocked certain parts of Fernando Rickson when he was going through motor neuron disease, which is absolutely appalling. Even I've seen on social media last night, even some Rangers fans thought that the story of the Jeremy Frimpong and the headline itself was absolutely ridiculous. If you're trying to attract people to support the headline that you've put out there, nobody's going to agree with that, because seeing modern day society, that sort of story, that sort of headline, that sort of clickbait shouldn't be accepted. On social media, they flag up Donald Trump when he puts out a political tweet that they believe breaches some sort of guidelines. There has to be guidelines brought in for things like this, especially when we know the amount of people that's suffering with mental health in Scotland that's gone through the roof, and things like that, where they're just attacking people for just living their lives. It's appalling. It is
appalling, and it begs the question of censorship in terms of, I read a lot whenever something like this happens, because it's happened regularly. Should the club do something about it? We've spoken to sports journalists, Colin, talking about how difficult that might be, actually, just to pinpoint publications or individuals. I mean, what's your thoughts on taking those kinds of measures against certain individuals or publications? Is that something that the club should consider?
See, at the end of the day, the newspaper's going to report on Celtic either way. So whether Celtic think it's better, the devil you know, and having them on side and trying to stop them from doing headlines like this, that's their prerogative. What I respected was Jurgen Klopp.
Yeah.
Jurgen Klopp, when he was interviewed, and he says, "You're from the Sun, I'm not speaking to you. Let them come to the news conferences if they want. Let them go to the games to cover the games. It doesn't mean that the players at Celtic and the manager at Celtic and any of the staff at Celtic need to speak to them. They've got a duty to produce content for the people that will read their newspaper. Celtic want to get the great news that they can get out there. Whether it's up to them whether they decide to speak to the journalists or not. And what I would say is that journalist in question probably won't be at Celtic Park anytime soon because he's not even a sports journalist. I
would implore anyone to read Professor Phil Scraton's book, The Truth, talking about Hillsborough, and obviously the headline that was used by the Sun newspaper back in 1989. But read The Truth by Professor Phil Scraton. One of the best books I've ever read. Harrowing, but you'll be glad that you read it. Now, talking of social media and how it affects people, Colin, I do know that following his sending off against Livingston last season away from home, Ryan Christie decided, and I don't know if he's still off social media, to remove all his social media channels due to the abuse he was getting at that time. But on the subject of Christie, it was claimed by Mark Wilson, who has appeared on a Celtic State of Mind previously, that Nice are set to make a £10 million bid for Ryan Christie in January. What's your thoughts on that? Because for me, and I've said this time and time again, this season, Christie's been our best player, most creative player we've got.
I agree he's been very creative this season. I still think Ryan Christie blows a lot of hot and cold, but I think when we spoke about this before, your claim's always been that the more creative he is, the more chances you're going to see that maybe hit Rose Ed instead of the back of the net like it did at the weekend. And when you've got the sort of flexibility of the 4-2-3-1, I think it allows him to do that. Mm-hmm. When you're playing the sort of 3-5-2 and he's either the second striker up front or he's one of the midfielders, I think that kind of curtailed his game as such. He's definitely flourishing in this new formation. What we've always said though is when we've got the players in for this season, they're in for the season. We don't let them go in January. Can you imagine selling someone like Christie in January, not replacing him, Edward in January, not replacing him? This season means so much to Celtic supporters that we can't afford to do it. At the time, if he wanted to move on, was in the summer window there. He stayed at the club. For me, you've got to keep him there for the rest of the season.
And again, the club were obviously applauded for their business in not only bringing players in, Colin, but keeping all our star players. You mentioned Christie, Edouard, Chris Ayer. There was interest in Olivier Ncham in the last window. And it seems to be coming round pretty quickly again, the next window. I think it's under 8 weeks, yes. Yeah. How difficult is it going to be this time round? I mean, it was difficult enough, I'm sure, but obviously by December, I think we all expected by October that we would be back at games. You know, I think mid-October was that date that was always in my mind. We'll be back at Celtic Park by mid-October. It's not happening. Everybody's resigned to the fact that we won't see a football game live until 2021. And obviously we know the financial implications of that. How difficult is it going to be with that in mind to keep a hold of all these guys we've mentioned?
I do have a feeling that we might have to sell someone in January because we didn't make the Champions League this year. I think if you made the Champions League, there would be no question about it. We'd see the season out and it would be okay because the money you get in from the Champions League, even without the ticket sales, obviously there's a difference in prize money when you move down to the Europa League, and when you're carrying a player budget of the size that we're carrying, if the club's looking to break even, then there might be the case where we do need to move someone on. It may be that a lot of people would now be happy to move Olivier Ncham on because they've seen his performances over the last few weeks, and the feedback I've seen is that he looks disinterested.
What do you think?
I don't know.
People criticise me because I'm a fan. I'm a fan of Ncham.
Yeah, as well.
I understand the inconsistencies. Absolutely. You know, and I've often said you either get a 4 or a 9 from him.
Yeah.
There's no middle ground, and the consistency is an issue. There's no doubt he's a quality player, Colin. I don't think anyone would deny that. But he is, of all the players that might have a sell on kind of value, he is, of all the players, the most dispensable. You'd rather that than Ayer or Edouard or Christie.
I'd agree with that. There's definitely players that can come in and play in his position. We've not really seen a lot of Ismail Assoro since he came in. And the glimpses that we have seen.
Was that a Lennon signing though? Or was that the head of recruitment? I'm just going back to a wee tweet that I received last week. You're right, Sorrow, Turnbull. People have been asking to see a bit more of Turnbull.
Look at Connolly as well. So,
well, what's your thoughts on that one? Because I mean, like everyone else, I've seen him playing it. What was the game? Rennes, the friendly game. Yeah. Yes, he looked like a handy player. He's got first team experience at Bolton, but to start saying he should be playing for the first team, what are we basing that on? Because he's not done anything in the first team that would suggest that he should be getting a game.
I think he'll go out on loan in January. I think he was kept in the squad in case of injury at the minute. So I think he'll probably go out on loan in January. Do you know what? The boy's probably got a future ahead of him. Neil Lennon rates him very highly. Anybody that speaks about him in the playing squad rate him very highly as well. Maybe he's just a player that does need his chance, and with the amount of games that we're playing this season, maybe he will get a chance. But there's other players that are in and around the squad that we've not really seen either. I mean, Ewan Henderson was kept on. Karamoko Dembele was spoke about time and time again. Still guys to come back like Mikey Johnson. Now, when's the last time Klamala actually got a bit of football now as well? Is he going to be kind of on the edges of not seeing him?
I think once you get Edouard and Ayeti back, Klamala's your fourth choice. Griffiths has come in, and I wanted to mention Griffiths because you and I spoke for a whole podcast earlier on this season about, the forgotten men of Celtic Park, and we were talking about people like Kundai Benyu, Anthony Ralston, but we didn't mention Tommy Rogic and Lee Griffiths. And for a couple of weeks after that, banging the drum on the fact that they should have been back part of the first team squad, particularly after Rogic's transfer broke down. They're back in, and I mean, Rogic, you've picked him for Thursday night. I don't disagree with that. How impressed have you been with the big fella since he's come back in?
He's been fantastic. What he offers you is that extra spark of creativity. He's always the person that can find a pass that will split open a defence. His cross at the weekend was absolutely outstanding. There was so little room for him to do what he done. I actually think he was shooting. I think he was trying to chip the goalkeeper. See, if you look at it back again, it does look as if he's trying to chip the goalkeeper. And Elyounoussi obviously comes in at the back post to knock it in. A lot of people go on about how he's only a 60-minute man, but if you can get 2 or 3 or even more goals up in the first 60 minutes, then let him play. And there's a lot of options to come off the bench that can replace him in that sense. We've spoke about Turnbull, who needs to get some minutes under his belt. So the way he's playing at the minute, to me, he's undroppable.
Yes, he's definitely a first pick, without a doubt, and he's come right in from the cold to put his name back in the mix. And if he's setting up 2 goals a game, Colin, I don't care if he plays 60 minutes. I don't care if he doesn't finish a game. That's his impact, and that's tremendous, because there's other players, as you say, in that position who can come on for half an hour, 45, whatever it entails, who do need the minutes. And I think Turnbull is someone that I'm hoping to see make an appearance, certainly on Thursday night, and then again against his former club on Sunday. Now, the other player that you mentioned there, the second goal scorer against Aberdeen on Sunday, Elyounoussi, not taken away from his ability in his own performances, but I think he's benefiting from having Lick Salt behind him. He's playing well.
They've formed a good partnership. The partnership on Thursday against Lille was Lick Salt, Elyounoussi and Ayeti, and it worked really, really well. You've seen them link up for the goals as well. Elyounoussi, I think, is definitely a player who needs to get partnerships. He's not someone that will win a game on his own. He links up very well with players. Last season he did it very well with Edouard, linking up, playing the 1-2s. Edouard was getting in for one-on-ones with the goalkeeper. He's a very, very important player in this squad at the minute, Elyounoussi. And as long as he keeps continuing to put those performances in, he also becomes one of those players that becomes undroppable.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, he starts playing well, and particularly in Europe, he's playing well. And then all of a sudden, the manager, Ralph Hasenhüttl, is that how you pronounce the Southampton manager's name? I'll give it a bash. Is talking in glowing terms about the fact that he may have a future at the club. So it's a double-edged sword. He performs well for Celtic. His parent club might want him back. Perhaps his transfer value is maintained, because I don't know if he looked like a £16 million man for the best part of this season. But he's turning it on now. He's turning on the style, and as you say, he's a definite starter for me as well, Colin. He likes the European games by all accounts. Looking at his performances this season, certainly.
Definitely. And I said to you last season, one of his more impressive performances was the game, which I don't like to go on about too much, but it was the game against Lazio away, where he turned the game round himself. He threw himself into the game and was very impressive. And he did that again against Lille. He was very impressive at the weekend. He is a kind of big game player, isn't he? He seems to turn up for these bigger games. But you're speaking about him potentially going back to Southampton at the end of his loan spell. We've also got someone like Mikey Johnson that's still to come back. We've not seen Johnson since January. Was that when he went off against St Johnstone?
It was a while ago now. I mean, the big thing with me with Johnson is you look at the stature in terms of his athleticism, his build. He's a player, Colin, for example, that I wouldn't expect him to go down south and perform because he's just not got that. He's not got the athleticism. But because he's so young, what you would hope for Mikey Johnson is that there's a transformation a la Ryan Christie, where he goes away and comes back and he's put on 1.5 stone in muscle.
Yeah.
I think in order for Mikey to take it to the next level, that's the kind of transformation that we're requiring. He's got the ability, no doubt.
Neil Lennon mentioned that the other day when I was speaking about him at a press conference. He says that he's going to take his time with Johnson, build him up slowly, get him back into the rhythm of the game. As I said, he's not really played football since January. He rushed himself back off an injury as well, and then played on when he knew he was injured, and it seems to have hurt him quite a bit because that's now.
But he got a word of encouragement on the way off the park from Lenny, didn't he?
Oh, it was words that we probably shouldn't repeat on this podcast, but yeah, we only have Elyounoussi on the left hand side at the minute. You spoke about pushing Lassault up further forward.
I think he could do it with Taylor behind him. I think he could do it, but I wouldn't choose to do that. No, it wouldn't be anybody's first choice, I don't think. And the way that Elyounoussi is playing at the minute, he's working very well with the players around him. And if you get that front four working together as a unit, they'll score a barrel load of goals this season. I'll come back to you for your prediction on Thursday night, Colin. But we're about 40 minutes into the broadcast, so let's have a look at what other people are saying via YouTube, Twitter, and also Facebook. Robert Highland is basically saying that YouTube is a channel to watch it on. Well, if you are watching on YouTube, then please subscribe, because we're trying to push the subscribers up, Colin, push the figures up. As I say, our next target is 500,000 a month, which is astonishing. Yeah. Gary McDowell, gentlemen, I am worried about our next 2 European games after the Czech Republic COVID cases are at 12,000 cases per day. I think we're all worried about the international football, the European football, Colin. That seems to be where the biggest risk is at the moment. Going back to another point you mentioned there, the international break's coming up. I know you were talking about it earlier on your other podcast, the Football Insomniac. Apparently Julien will be back after the international break. Massive return, if that's true. So he went to see a specialist in Germany last week. That would be great news if he's back after the international break. It's another option. At the minute we're quite light in defence. There is only really Beaton and Duffy. You could throw Welsh in there, but again he's someone that's only played a handful of professional football games, so it's not somebody that you want to have to rely on week in and week out. Great to see him back. Hopefully Ayer won't be too far behind that as well. So going in and actually having a fully fit first team defence would be a great boost ahead of what will be quite a tough run when we come back after this international break. I'm just sorry, Colin, for a moment. I'm just blocking some of the usual suspects for the whataboutery. No matter what you speak about, but what about? And they'll go back to the usual dialogue in relation to other matters that we're not discussing. So, yeah, blocked. Another one bites the dust. Yeah, do you know what? I don't understand people that try and point score on things that they wouldn't even discuss in normal life. They think you go on social media and you've got free reign to discuss things like that. I see it on both sides, and people that try and make point scoring off people's misery is just shameful. Well, the big thing is with regards to that is how it affects people. you know. And, you know, in relation to the matter at hand, Colin, you've got to look at how it affects people who are affected by, let's say, a criminal case that's ongoing, or a headline that's been retracted. And Terry Tibbs reckons that tabloids in general are, the word you used, scum. Now, before I go on, what I would say is I've met loads of really decent people who work in the mainstream media. There are loads of brilliant writers out there, Colin, who I can't just generalise and say, oh, they're all scum. I refuse to do it, because there are loads of really good people, good writers, whose livelihoods are in journalism.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? So you've got to differentiate between the people who are not doing it correctly, or the publications who are not doing it correctly, and those who are. You know, it's just a blanket thing for me, doesn't work. But Terry goes on to say that they will print anything, no matter whose life it will ruin. And that's something that I think is important, because let's talk about criticism, Colin. Let's talk about putting your neck on the line and being criticised for it. It doesn't feel good, does it? To be criticised, to be called names for certain things to happen that will not broadcast on the show as a result of you airing an opinion. It doesn't feel good, as any human being is going to be affected by that. So if you look at a national tabloid printing a headline like that, you've got to look at who it affects and how it affects them. And it's wrong. And in this time of global catastrophe, where it's affecting people more than ever, Colin, we need to take that into account. We need to be more careful about how these headlines are going to affect people.
The way I've always seen it is newspapers have papers to sell. They're paying their journalists money. They need the circulation. Sometimes they'll go for a desperate headline. On the Insomniac podcast earlier on, we had Ewan Robertson in, who's been he's wrote stories for several of the publications that's out there. And what I've always found about his stuff is that it's always in depth. It's always like an analysis of something, and I'd rather read something like that which offers you a balanced viewpoint rather than a story like the Jeremy Frimpong story, which is basically a girl that has sold her story to the newspaper, and they thought that they're going to get loads of clicks and loads of purchases of their paper because they've run something. I don't even know if it's on their front page. I don't even look at their paper anymore. I don't look at most papers, to be honest. But it's the way that they make their money, and if they're happy with doing that, that's their prerogative, but I don't agree with it at all.
Well, what I would say to everybody who is tuning in is that there is efforts on a daily basis to weed out anyone who's making inappropriate comments on the broadcast. We do it live. We go into the YouTube channel after the event as well and work our way through them. Block them, and that's exactly what we do, because it's a Celtic podcast, and we really don't have time to be dealing with that kind of nonsense. So we are taking active measures to get rid of all these people, so that everybody who enjoys the broadcast can continue to do so. Colin, now the leading question today, though, is it time for Celtic to speak out against COVID double standards? Now, we've been silent on this ever since the latest case came to light in relation to players who had breached regulations. Now, obviously, or infamously, our own player, Bolingoli, who's now out in Turkey plying his trade, he let everybody down, doing what he did, travelling abroad, not being in quarantine when he comes back. And Celtic were forced to miss 2 games as a result of that. There appears to be absolutely no punishment for the most recent breach, which has led to Chris Sutton, former Celt Chris Sutton, coming out and saying that it's ridiculous, there's double standards. I totally agree with him. Is it time that the club came out and took a stand on such matters?
It's a delicate situation, this, at the moment. We have known through the various breaches or stories that have been released over the last few weeks that a lot of clubs are feeling this. I mean, I think Kilmarnock had games postponed. It looks as if they might have to actually drop the 3 points against Motherwell. That was the discussion that was ongoing. St Mirren have had several outbreaks. Celtic have had their incident with Bolingoli, the alleged incident with Jeremy Frimpong, which according to the SPFL, he broke no rules, so we have to go with the guidelines that they put out there. Rangers had their issues as well at the start of the season with the testing. This thing with Jones and Edmondson, Aberdeen have had it. There's going to be so many of these coming up over the season, and what needs to be done is there needs to be a agreed protocol out there where if something does happen, this is this is the repercussions for it. And what you're really saying here is, if the standard's been set for one, it should be set for all. And it's kind of hard to disagree with that.
Well, you can't, you really can't disagree with it, and it's frustrating as Celtic fans. I said to you before we came on here today, as Celtic supporters, as football fans, you've paid into this game this season and you're getting nothing back. I mean, we're all aware of that, Colin. You're getting nothing back. You're getting a live stream for a ticket that often lags, it buffers, it's delayed. Hence the reason we don't stay on live during the games, because we can't give you a live reaction if you're a minute or something behind the live action. But what you would expect is, you would expect that in times like this, where there is an issue that Celtic fans feel very strongly about, that the club would stand up and actually take a stand against it and at least make a comment about it.
Well, what I found interesting was there's certain people out there in the media, again, probably using a publication which was slaughtered on air already today, who have previously made comments saying that teams should be punished for players' behaviour, and then when it comes round to a team that they actually have a backing or support themselves, they say it's not quite the same thing. I don't agree with that. So if these people have the opinion or the right to show their opinion out to the mainstream, then so does the fan media. That's what we're doing here on A Celtic State of Mind. We're showing what the Celtic fan support is actually thinking about this current situation. We've discussed this on and off air. I agree with you. I think there should be a protocol set. Mm-hmm. And if the fans agree with it, then the club clearly knows what's going on. Will the club step up and stand up and make a statement? I don't think they will. Should they?
They've got to.
Should they? Yes. But there's a lot of things that Celtic should have released statements on before. It just doesn't feel as if it's the way that the board kind of runs things, and that's up to the fans to decide whether that's a good thing or not.
And it's, as I say, I'm not a big fan of statements for statement's sake. Statement o'clock on a Friday or a Sunday night. I'm not a big fan of that. But I think in cases like this, you've got to come out and you've got to make your position known. Barca Boy, welcome back to the show. Massive fan of Christie. People overlook his work rate. Just look how better Frimpong looks with him. That's a good point as well, because we've said about like Salt's relationship or what would you call that? That partnership, there you go, not relationship. His partnership on the left hand side with El Yunusi, and I think it has improved Moy's performances. I think that's a part of it. And on the right hand side, I think Christie has helped Frimpong. I really do. I think he's helped Frimpong come on as well. So I don't underestimate Christie. I know that a lot of people pinpoint the nature of his risky shots, his risky passes that don't come off. Mm-hmm. But what you get in return for that, the flip side of that, Colin, is that when they do come off, he's creating goals or he's scoring goals like he did on Sunday. That's one of the best goals I've seen at Hampden Park. Yeah, and he done it. It's a very similar goal to the goal he scored against Hearts at Murrayfield. Remember, another semi-final. This time it was in the League Cup. Yep. So he's got that in his locker. He can definitely produce that, and he can produce goals like the goal at Rugby Park earlier on this season as well. Again, just like what we spoke about with Ncham, all we want is just a wee bit more consistency with Christie, and I think he will get that as the games go on. I'd also love if he could beat a first man at a corner. I think we really need to work on our set pieces in that sense. I said before, Colin, there's a big focus on it. I focused on it myself. The two games, Ferencváros, Dundee United, 17 corners, and we didn't create a goal from any of them. And, since then I've basically came to the conclusion that just take them off the corners, take them off the set pieces, because there's a lot of focus on those set pieces not coming off. Let him concentrate on other parts of his game now. Glasgow Road, great chat again, guys. It's great to hear that. We do listen to all our feedback, and there's been a few people on there trying to noise everybody up today, Colin, and they have been blocked. So keep letting us know. It's not about grassing anybody up. It's just about keeping the place clean and free from that kind of chat, because no one wants to hear it. I still find it absurd that anybody would spend their afternoon, Colin, on a Celtic podcast if they support Rangers. I find that absolutely strange. Weird.
Do you know what? But I have to. They're not all like that. There is some decent ones that I've seen on the chat, because I watch the streams and they do contribute and they give their opinions. But certain times and certain ones just come on, want to noise people up. Look, if you get nothing better to do with your time, really? I mean, is it the fact that Celtic State of Mind is one of the best podcasts that's out there, the best produced podcast, that the Rangers podcast just aren't as good, so you've got to go and spend your time watching the Celtic one? Is that what it is? Are we take it as praise, Paul? Is that the way we maybe look on it?
Aye, well, I'd rather they weren't here, to be honest with you, Colin,
true.
Because as I say, we are building something gradually that, just last month we had over 450,000 people tuning in, which across a number of different platforms, but it's just astonishing for me, and I thank everybody for tuning in and constantly getting involved. I mean, these live broadcasts are great because people can have their say. That's what it's for. It's not so people can come on and have an argument about ongoing criminal cases that everybody's aware of, and that's the kind of thing that I think ruins a lot of these platforms. So we are watching with keen eyes during the live broadcast and afterwards as well. But a point on the ball and goalie situation is, the situations were different, but Celtic weren't prevented from playing due to ball and goalie attending training or playing a game. It was simply because he broke the actual regulation. He broke the rules, as have the two newest members to have broken the rules have done. So, we can split hairs that way, Colin, say the situations were different. There's no consistency. Can
you imagine we were talking about this last season and you were saying that the discussions on the season when Celtic's going for 10 in a row is going to be about whether players were at a house party or whether players had a girlfriend on the side or whether they made a surprise trip off to Spain? It just shows the stark reality of the world that we're living in at the moment during this pandemic. Nobody could have predicted this was going to happen, especially maybe as we celebrated 8 in a row. We didn't know this was going to happen. Now we're at home watching the games on streams that lag. Even the Premier Sports stream lagged at the weekend.
I know.
We're paying 500, 600, 700, maybe more pounds for a virtual season ticket so that we can still support our club but watch the games from our own house. The pubs aren't even open. You can't even go and have a pint with your friends to watch the game. When you do watch the games, there's no commentary on. It's a strange time that we're living in, and I feel a slight sympathy to the players. As much as they get chastised by the media and some of the fans, it's a difficult world for them because it's totally different to what they're used to, and they just have the spotlight on them all the time. If a player does something, then it's instantly in the press, it's in the media. Whereas if a regular fan was to break the same protocol, then we wouldn't even hear about it.
No, you're absolutely right. Now, Colin, I'm going to be asking you for your prediction in just a few moments in relation to Thursday night's game. I've said over the last couple of weeks that, my priority this season, like everybody of a Celtic persuasion, is 10 in a row. Mm-hmm. But over the last few weeks, I've been thinking about what do I realistically expect from this season? What brought that on? Probably looking at some of the bad performances that we've had. And then, reacting probably to a lot of the criticism Celtic fans came under, being called spoiled, entitled, panty wetters, all this kind of stuff. We constantly get that. And I don't think there's any issue with trying to achieve a high standard at all times. There's no issue with that. If you've got a high standard and that high standard results in you winning the league season on season, because you're never handed the league, Colin, regardless of who's in the league, you're never handed it. It's hard work. And to consistently win league title after league title is an incredible achievement. So I did start thinking, well, what do I actually think is realistic this season? What would I be satisfied with? Well, obviously I'd love to win the 5 tournaments. I've said that before. But realistically, I think 10 in a row, plus last season's Scottish Cup to give us a quadruple treble. I will be satisfied with that, right? Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean to say I don't have ambitions that I wouldn't try in the League Cup or the Scottish Cup or indeed the Europa League. And I've mentioned again, the Europa League is important to maintain a momentum. So you get a good result against Aberdeen. How much of that was down to the good performance on Thursday night against Lille? Likewise, we're going into the game tomorrow night. We want to get that momentum continuing so that we go into the Motherwell game. And through that, we might even progress into the next level of the Europa League. What's your thoughts on expectations this season?
I'm going to throw you out a question in a second, but I would say now that you're in the final of the Scottish Cup from last season, which was actually quite funny because I was looking up the stats for this season and I actually forgot that because the Scottish Cup was last season, Christie and Elyounousse's goals count towards last season's totals instead of this year's,
right,
which is quite interesting. 10 is massive. Like, we've been singing about it since before we'd even won the first title. And we're on the verge of history, and this is the season that we've all looked forward to. So 10 is the big one. I've got to agree with that. Then come down to the League Cup and the Scottish Cup. Now, we've been on a fantastic run. We look as if we're on the verge of a quadruple treble. That doesn't get spoke about enough. The fact that for the amount of cup games that Celtic's won on a repeated basis, I don't know if there's any other teams across the world that have won a treble 4 seasons in a row. Somebody will probably correct me if I'm wrong, but we could be the first team to do it. So that's fantastic. When it comes down to this season though, do you really get excited about the cups until you're in the latter stages of them? See, if the Betfred Cup wasn't a thing this season, would Celtic fans be disappointed? I don't think so. The Scottish Cup obviously has the history attached to it, just the same way the FA Cup does down south. But the league is the priority. It's 10 for me. It's getting the quadruple treble because we're in the final of it. If we're going to be out of the cups, the League Cup and the Scottish Cup, I'd rather it was done early, because when you get to a final, it's worse to lose a final than what it is to lose in the third round. You know,
when we're looking at, and it's happened quite a bit in England, and it was part of the situation just about a month ago, Colin, when they were looking at the big picture and they're talking about getting rid of the Charity Shield and getting rid of the League Cup and that kind of thing. And there has been issues over the years with teams putting out reserve teams really in the League Cup down south. You know, I don't think it's a case of putting a reserve team. Celtic could quite comfortably put out what would maybe be not their first choice team in a tournament like the League Cup, and you would still be looking at that side and it would be a strong side. You know, we have, without the injury issues that we've had obviously and the illness over the last few weeks, we've got a deep enough squad to do that. And if your priority is 10, and I think in terms of the financial element of it as well, though, Colin, this season, you know, actually getting that 10 is massive for Celtic. It is something that could be considered. And I don't mean playing the kids as such. I mean, there's players in our squad who don't get a great deal of game time. I mean, a midfield made up of some of the players we've mentioned already, you know, Turnbull, for example, or Sorrow. And you could make 5-6 changes, and not only are you resting players, but you're giving some of the fringe players games. Would you be happy if Celtic approached the League Cup this season with that in mind? Definitely.
As I said, I think it's always worse to lose a final as a Celtic fan than to lose in like the third round or the fourth round. The worst Hampden memories I've got of losing in finals or losing in semi-finals. Whereas sometimes when you lose in the third or fourth round of a competition, it's just forgot about and moved on. I mean, how many times before we actually went into this run, when we were maybe under Gordon Strachan previously, or even under Tony Mowbray, Martin O'Neill, did we kind of go out in the earlier rounds and it was just, the season was a success because you won the league? So to me, the Betfred Cup's a bit of a distraction this season, and I don't know what the time scale is for the games, but if that's got to be finished this side of the year as well, then that's a no-go for me.
Liam Kelly, welcome to the show via YouTube. Liam, quadruple treble and 10 equally important, but quadruple treble is a global record and much harder to do. 10 has been done before in Norway and will be done in Italy and Germany. So yeah, there's lots going on this season, Colin. It's a shame that we can't be there to see it. All that's left for me to ask you on this broadcast today is your prediction for tomorrow night.
I'm going to go with Celtic to win 3-0, and I'll go with Ryan Christie to be the first goal scorer.
3-0. That's a bold prediction.
I think Sparta's missing 7 key players. They're missing their first choice goalkeeper. They're missing their key players in midfield. So maybe a bit of a weaker side that we face. We're starting to get a bit of momentum going. I think a big victory here will really get us on the right track and continue what we've started.
Excellent. Now I look forward to watching that game. We will be covering the game half an hour before kick-off at half-time, and then for half an hour after the kick-off as well. But we will also be back tomorrow afternoon at 12:30 with your usual Celtic State of Mind bulletin. It's been an absolute pleasure once again, Colin, for you to join us in the studio. So all that's left for me to say is thanks to everybody who's tuned in, and we'll see you again at 12:30 for the Celtic State of Mind bulletin.
Hey, well.